Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this very exciting Young People's Hustings this evening for Dumfriesshire, organised and hosted by the Dumfries and Galloway Youth Council. It's an exciting election in a very strange time for our country, and at the heart, a lot of these conversations is critical to look at today's generation of young people right across the constituency and local authority in the much broadest sense. We have representation from all of the major political parties standing for election this week, and so we're very delighted to welcome them all with us. Please engage with the conversation online at Youth Council DG, but also use the hashtag YouthVoiceDG, and there's an opportunity to have more of an informal and ongoing conversation, and I'm sure the candidates and their respective parties welcome keeping the chat going after this session has finished as well. We're around this evening for just under 90 minutes, and we're going to kick off by introducing the candidates in turn and welcoming them to speak for up to 3 minutes to set out the stall for their vision for the area and the constituency and their wider platforms for the respective parties. My name's John Loughton. I will be moderating, and all the questions that have been shortlisted and put in front of me have been written, selected and shortlisted by local young people who have asked us all to speak to these questions. I'm going to just do it in random order, as that order that I've written the names down, if that works for everybody. So I'm actually going to come to the representative for the candidate for the Labour Party, and invite Colin Smyth, MSP, for up to 3 minutes to speak to us.
Thanks very much, everybody. I'll just make sure I'm unmuted. The most common phrase in English language at the moment is you're on mute, Colin, so I'll just double check that. But it is fantastic to be joining you this evening, and thanks very much indeed for hosting this hustings. I mean, I'm standing to be a local MSP in Dumfriesshire because Dumfriesshire really matters to me. It's an area I'm absolutely passionate about. It's where I was born. It's where I've always lived. It's where I bring up my family. But I think too often it's a part of the country that's forgotten by governments in Edinburgh and London. That's one of the reasons why I stood for the Scottish Parliament back in 2016 for the first time, to try to be a strong voice for our area in Parliament, to support our community, in particular during what has been an incredibly difficult time for everybody, because the last year has been tough. The pandemic separated us from our friends and our families, and we've seen far too many lives and livelihoods and opportunities being lost and still very much at risk. So that's why I passionately believe that the focus of the next Parliament must be on delivering a national recovery plan that helps our community and our economy rebuild after the pandemic. And key to that plan are 5 strands. The first is having a jobs recovery. So that means guaranteeing that everyone under the age of 25 has a job with protected time for training, whether that's in the public sector or within the private sector. And we'll support that by paying the wages of those young people for the first 6 months, in return for those firms guaranteeing that job becomes permanent. The second part of that is an NHS recovery, tackling the backlog of cases, in particular when it comes to improving our mental health and our well-being. The third strand to that is an education recovery, so a comeback plan for every single young person in our schools and colleges, and the IT support that they need to make sure that we can deliver that, and also a minimum student income and secure affordable accommodation in our colleges and our universities. Crucial part of our national recovery plan is also that climate recovery, investing in those green jobs that we need here in Dumfries and Galloway, and taking real action on the climate emergency and protecting our environment. And finally, a community recovery. So, for example, investing in local services to bring communities together and delivering free travel for all our under 25s. It's really crucial that the next 5 years are about delivering a recovery plan. That should be the focus of our politicians, in particular supporting our young people during not only the current difficulties, but to make sure that we give you the opportunities of the future, because there's no doubt that the pandemic has disproportionately impacted on our young people, whether that's the missed opportunities in school, those job opportunities that are being lost at the moment, and the impact on our mental health. And whoever wins this election, you know, my pledge to local people, whoever's elected, is that we'll be here from whatever party there to support you through the next months and years ahead.
Colin, thank you very much. 2:46, what a fantastic example of self-restraint and timekeeping there, crammed full of the 5 strands that your party is putting forward that you spoke about, so thank you very much. I'm now going to invite the Liberal Democrat representative and candidate, Councillor Richard Brodie, to set forward your 3 minutes opening remarks for us.
Hi, thanks everyone for attending today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and the Scottish Liberal Democrats to convince you that I stand out for other candidates and that my party has great values which young people can support. First of all, I'm not a career politician. I became involved through my campaigning in the community, standing up for the disadvantaged in society. I also taught at an academy and became head of special needs, teaching the most vulnerable children. My first community brush with the council was when I started a tenants association in Annan to fight for improved housing conditions. The council wouldn't listen to our concerns, so I had to launch a strong press campaign to get action. This led me to being a councillor, vigorously taking up about people's problems. And one thing I'm proud of is setting up the Citizens Advice Bureaus in Dumfries and Annan, which support needy individuals. Top things I've also achieved are starting the award-winning Devil's Porridge Museum at Eastriggs. I'm also driving forward the Annan Harbour development and spearheading the Annan History Town project. I currently represent Annandale South on Dumfries and Galloway Council. I'm one of the 4 councillors championing the climate change agenda to make the council carbon neutral by 2025. I also campaigned for free bus travel for young people and for the opening of local rail stations. So why choose the Liberal Democrats? Well, Liberal Democrats also stand up for the disadvantaged. We oppose privilege and believe that we are all equal, whatever our sexual orientation, colour of skin, religion. Lib Dems want to reform the unelected House of Lords, but Conservatives and Labour have always opposed this because they see it as a way of rewarding their donors at our expense. We want a fairer UK proportional voting system. Labour and Conservatives have never introduced it because they want their hands on power. That majority of votes. Incredibly, 60% of voters didn't back Boris Johnson, but we are stuck with this corrupt government for 5 years. SNP's priority is a second India referendum, which will divide the country down the middle. Lib Dems want a federal system, which will give the Scottish Parliament more powers. We want to be an equal partner in a union with the regions of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. In these Scottish elections, Lib Dem policies excel in delivering more mental health support for young people, guaranteeing jobs for youngsters, creating green jobs to improve homes and tackle climate change. We are the Green Party without independence thrown in. Scottish Liberal Democrats have great policy and I look forward to answering your questions on them. Thank you.
Councillor, thank you very much. Another great example of timekeeping there. Really appreciate that and for setting that out. I am now going to invite the actual Green Party candidate this evening and ask James Puchowski, who is a list candidate, to introduce yourself and your party.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to join you all this evening. No, we are the Scottish Green Party. We stand on very simple principles: peace, sustainability and local democracy. We don't think it's very green, for example, to belong to the United Kingdom with nuclear weapons and military colonies, stolen land, for example. Stuff like that isn't very green, and we don't really see that being reformed by getting rid of the House of Lords, which has been obviously talked about now for about 100 years by most progressive parties in London. But that's by the by. Now, the Scottish Green Party is standing candidates in every region of Scotland on Thursday, and because we have a voting system that is far more proportional than the one we used to elect MPs to Westminster, voters across the country, especially young voters, will have the opportunity to elect a record number of Green MSPs. And it's so exciting that our candidates, not just in the south of Scotland, but across the country, come from different backgrounds, professions, and demographic groups across the country. I myself, I'm 26 years old. I'm actually based in Edinburgh right now, but that's because I'm writing up my PhD. And so basically we have young people, old people, people of different backgrounds. And before I came to the Scottish Greens in 2014, I campaigned for Scottish independence. In fact, I believe Joan McAlpine and I were on a similar show on free speech on BBC Three many years ago. And I was sat in front in the audience wearing my English Scots BS badge. And I think Joan McAlpine was there asking me to speak at different points. Now, obviously for me, I'm a young person. If you're below the age of 50, about 60 to 70% of you are going to be in favour of independence. So the question is, what do we do with independence? And as the poll suggests, we're going to elect a record number of Scottish Green MSPs, and the future Scotland should and must be totally in sync with how we tackle the climate and nature crises. We only have 9 years left to really tackle the challenges posed by climate change. And the south of Scotland, the region, the vast, massive region that it is going to be so vital to the inevitable transition that we're going to have to make. Now, with a handful of Green MSPs we've had since 2016, we've been pushing the SNP government in an uncomfortable but necessary direction. Now, be that on recent school grades or on free public transport, which is about to happen, or on the extraction of natural resources, more Scottish Green MSPs will continue to do this job, being that constructive, challenging opposition. And, the South was so close to getting a Scottish Green MSP back in 2016. About 2,000 votes made that difference between electing an MSP and not, so really close. And it's going to be so exciting that on Thursday that we're going to hopefully elect Laura Moody, our #1 candidate, and have a local Scottish Green champion at Holyrood. And we have the momentum, but it depends on people coming out on Thursday and voting for that sustainable, progressive, and hopefully one day independent country, as we basically make the case for a second referendum. Basically, we're asking people on Thursday, whether they voted by mail or whether they're going to vote in person, to think about their future, to vote as if that future depends on that vote, because parliamentary term is 5 years. There's 9 years left. We have the COP coming up in Glasgow later this year. There are so many issues that relate down to the economic model and coming out of this pandemic. So basically, yeah, if you're really struggling to vote, think about who you're going to give your list vote to. It would not be wasted on giving to the Scottish Greens, especially when we are so in sync with how young people currently are thinking across the country.
James, thank you very much for setting out that stall there. I appreciate that. We're now going to invite the SNP candidate, Joan McAlpine, MSP. And we've got unmute. Is that okay? Hi,
yes,
Joan.
I was trying to unmute, but it wasn't obeying me.
No,
it's sorted now. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for asking me to come here tonight, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions. I spent the day with Nicola Sturgeon, who was visiting Dumfries today, and I just wanted to address some of the points that have been made about the for Dumfries and Galloway, and she was visiting something called the Mid-Steeple Quarter, which is a community-owned social enterprise company, which is supported by every politician here I know, that was set up to buy back parts of the high street for the community, turn it into affordable housing and get people living in the town centre again, so we can revive the town centre and create jobs and create a better community for people to live in. When she was here the last time, it was a concept that the community had devised themselves, but it's because of Scottish Government policies and Scottish Government funding that it's now a reality. They have now bought 5 of the buildings and they're going to transform them. So the Scottish Land Fund that we set up has given them money. South of Scotland Enterprise that we set up is giving them money. And also the community empowerment laws that the SNP government passed has enabled this to happen. And I look forward to the First Minister coming back when she's re-elected and seeing the progress there. But the reason I give you that example is because it's a good example of the SNP delivering the policies it talks about, and the SNP delivering for this area of the country, because the Mid-Steeple Quarter, people are looking at that all around the UK and indeed the world as a good example of communities taking back town centres. So the SNP has a good progressive delivery record. We have already kept university tuition free for students. It costs students £27,000 in the UK and England and Wales. We've also kept educational maintenance allowance for young people aged 16 to 19 to stay on at school or college, which again was abolished in England and Wales. And in Scotland, the SNP government has not just kept it for families of average and low incomes, but it's actually extended it to cover more young people. So we do have a good track record in that regard. And that's why the pledges that we are making and going into this election, I can say with confidence that we'll be delivering those. So to talk about some of those pledges in terms of jobs for young people, we are delivering a jobs guarantee, which will guarantee young people a place in work, education, an apprenticeship or training, or a meaningful volunteering opportunity. We're also, we have a strong green agenda. We are going to create, we're going to put £100 million into creating green jobs and a green jobs fund. And that will be things like decarbonising our homes. There's about 1.6 billion going into decarbonising homes. That will create many more jobs. Similarly, our house building programme, which is already well underway in Dumfries and Galloway, building 100,000 new affordable homes, will create many, many more jobs and apprenticeships. We have a £500 million training fund, jobs creation and training fund that we intend to roll out. So I'm confident that the SNP will be delivering for young people. I hope to talk about some of our other policies in the course of this evening, not least our plans to give people a free choice in Scotland's future once the pandemic is over. Thank you.
Great. Joan, thank you very much. It went a wee bit over, but there was a bunch of time there where we were getting the mute button to work for you, so that's fine. And our final candidate this evening representing the Scottish Conservatives is Oliver Mendel Msp. Hi, over to yourself, Oliver.
Thanks, John, and thank you for organising tonight's event. I've represented Dumfriesshire for the past 5 years, and I hope to do so again. I grew up here. I continue to be involved in youth work, leading a youth group in Moffat. I've enjoyed very much working with young people, working with the Youth Council, working with Youth Work, Dumfries and Galloway, and I hope to continue that partnership because I think it's not just about what policies you have. I think it's about how you work with people, and I think particularly as someone who was a young person probably at the last election, and probably relative to a lot of MSPs is still quite young. I think it's important to actually listen to what young people have to say for themselves. I think too often politicians talk about young people and jump straight on to the topics that they think interest them rather than actually listening and starting a conversation. So I hope that's something we can do tonight. In terms of the Scottish Conservatives, we are very strongly opposed to a second independence referendum. I think that that's important here in Dumfries and Galloway, where our local economy is very interconnected with those in the north of England. Lots of people have family on both sides of the border. And I think that another independence referendum in the next 5 years is a big distraction from the challenges we face off the back of the coronavirus. We also have a number of positive policies, like a 10% guarantee of funding from the health budget for mental health, something which I think is really important. We've got some exciting policies around the environment, including a new national park in Galloway, which I think is a big chance to draw people into our region. And we're also in favour of funding for improvements to our railways and to dual the A75, which I think is holding our region back and limiting opportunities for everyone here in Dumfries and Galloway. Another big pledge is to take fibre broadband to every home by 2027. And I think these are the sort of things we need to be focusing on, not going back to old arguments around independence. So I'm looking forward to answering detailed questions tonight, and I'm just grateful to the young people present for taking the time to engage in this process. And I'd say whoever you plan to vote for, and for whatever reason, the most important thing is to go out and vote on Thursday. Again, too often, I think young people disengage from politics, and the evidence shows young people are less likely to vote in elections. So I think tell your friends, and most importantly, make sure you vote yourself. Thank you.
Oliver, thank you very much. Until the young people locally joining us live right now, or if you're watching the recording, that is the stall set out from the main political parties asking for your support this week. We're going to go straight into questions that, of course, have been written by young people with a focus on specifically the elements of the policies that impact on local young people. And the questions largely surround a number of topics, but none more important perhaps than that of skills and education. So I'd like to ask, first of all, and I'll come to Colin for this, first of all, as what is your party's big idea or ideas around education at this election, with a particular focus around that poverty-related attainment gap and supporting those young people from the more deprived or challenging backgrounds?
Thanks very much, John. I mean, I think it's an absolutely crucial question, and I think it's important to stress that first of all, the challenges that we face around the attainment gap didn't happen just because of the pandemic. That's an issue that's been there for some time, and sadly, we've not seen enough effort being made to close that attainment gap. We know that children from the most deprived areas are likely to do less well at school than those from the more affluent areas, and that attainment gap, frankly, hasn't been closed. So if we really want to make a difference when it comes to education, then the difference that we need to make is to tackle poverty in the first place, because that's the biggest cause of related attainment challenges that we face. So one policy that Labour are proposing is to double the child payment to all families from £10 to £20 per week. And that'll make a big difference when it comes to tackling child poverty. It's a scandal that in Dumfries and Galloway, 7,000 young people, children, are living in poverty, and the level of child poverty has actually increased under the current Scottish Government. We obviously have a particular challenge when it comes to the impact of the pandemic. It doesn't take me to tell any young people that the challenge that they've had faced as a result of schools being closed, and the challenge of not actually being able to do your work within the classroom itself. So one of our commitments as part of our national recovery plan is to make sure that every single child has a personal catch-up plan so that they can effectively catch up on that work that they've missed as a result of being out of school. Now, that will require additional teachers, because the burdens that we're placing on our current teachers at the moment, frankly, are unacceptable. Therefore, we do need to employ additional teachers. So our commitment is to increase the number of teachers that we have in our schools by 3,000 across Scotland. That'll mean almost 100 more teachers here in Dumfries and Galloway, to give every pupil that individual plan to make sure that they can catch up when it comes to the missed education that they're going to face. And the final point I would make is that at the moment, a lot of young people will be facing the challenges of they'll have exams, effectively results set by their teachers for the end of the year, because they won't be able to do exams as they currently have done in the past. And what's really important is that no child, no young person misses out when it comes to their grades because they've missed schooling over the last year. So what's really important is that pupils at the moment are given that extra tutoring in order to make sure that the current assessments that they're being asked to do, because they are being asked to do assessments, it may not be exams, but they are being asked to do assessments, properly reflect the abilities that those young people have, and nobody gets a grade that they don't deserve and misses out as a result of that.
Colin, thank you. Really bring in Joan then, if I can, on the back of that. There was a reference to some child poverty statistics, or indeed there's some evidence out there that the attainment gap is remaining quite stubborn and sometimes going in the wrong direction. Do you see, for the Scottish Government or for the SNP, do you have new ideas for how you would continue to tackle that problem going forward?
Yes, I mean, the child poverty is completely unacceptable. And that is why, with the limited powers that we have in the Scottish Parliament, we've already delivered a Scottish child payment, which rolled out in November last year. And our plan is to double that to £20 a week for every eligible child. So we're going to deliver that. I think it's important to point out that, and I agree with Colin on this, is that, the attainment gap in education is related to poverty, and you need control of all the levers to tackle poverty. And in Scotland, the Scottish Parliament doesn't have all those levers. We don't control employment law. We don't control the level of the the minimum wage. We don't control working benefits like universal credit and the levels of that. So what we do is we're working with the powers we have to deliver this transformative £20 a week for eligible child payment. I think that will make a big difference on top of some of the other things that we're doing. I mentioned educational maintenance allowance in my opening remarks, which doesn't apply to young people in England and Wales, but we've kept it here in Scotland. In terms of what we can do in education, in what we are doing in education with regards to the attainment gap, we've invested 750 million over the last 5 years tackling the attainment gap. And we've already seen progress between for example, the least deprived pupils getting a level 5 award. That's the gap has shrunk by more than a third. And at level 6, which is Highers, the gap has shrunk by a fifth. Now, that's not as much as we want to see. We want to see more being done with regards to that. But that's why going into the next Parliament, we are committed to increasing the number of teachers by 3,500. To help tackle that. Some of our other ideas are implementing a funded package of support for pupils who have fallen behind because of the pandemic, and also devolving more powers and financial control to teachers themselves. And our curriculum for excellence, which has been in place for quite some time now, is currently being reviewed. We asked for it to be reviewed by the OECD, which is an international organisation that monitors different education systems. So they're going to be reviewing that just now, and we're going to find out soon when they reveal the findings of that, if there's anything we can do with the curriculum that will help us close the attainment gap going forward.
Joan, thank you very much. I'll now bring in Oliver Mundell, if that's okay. I think we've heard a relative agreement on the doubling of the child payment from Labour and the SNP there, if I've picked that up correctly. Maybe some finite detailed differences, I'm not sure. I talk about more teachers, and from Joan there talking about, you know, some of the wider elements of wanting more powers to look at poverty and that gap more widely. How do the Scottish Conservatives propose to tackle the attainment gap in our approach to educating our young people?
I'd say the first thing I just want to point out here in Dumfries and Galloway, I think there's a further issue, and that's rurality. I've been concerned. I've been on the Education Committee a couple of times in the last Parliament for a significant chunk of it. And it's one of the things that really worries me is that we don't support small schools. They miss out on pupil equity funding often because rural poverty can be harder to find, and also we've not. I think we have to remember. I mean, there is one party on this panel who've been in government for 14 years, so it's nice to promise things at the election. I think the question is why. We've seen teacher numbers cut while the SNP have been in power, and that's disproportionately affected small rural schools. And one of the things the Conservatives have set out is that we want 3,000 more teachers, but those are predominantly going to be targeted at smaller schools in rural communities to make sure that everyone gets the same chance in education. So that's one of our big policy areas. But I also think it's trying to be honest about the curriculum for excellence and some of the changes that have been made in education in recent years, and saying that they haven't worked as well as was hoped for when they were introduced. And I think one of the big issues is, the idea, again, that teachers can create a curriculum, on top of all of the other pressures that they face. And I think we need to support teachers more, and make sure that they have the support to build lesson plans, and that there's time for them to do that, and that they're trusted to get on with it. Because I think at the moment we've got a kind of halfway house system, and that hasn't worked well. And then the final point for me, at a local level, I think we've got to do more to help support young people into the job opportunities that exist locally. We lose around 800 young people a year from Dumfries and Galloway, but there are good job opportunities here, and I think we need to be doing more to support the work of Dumfries and Galloway College and the Barney campus, which is part of the SRUC, to make sure that in farming and forestry, and also in the tourism and hospitality and care sectors, we're making sure that people are getting training for the jobs that are here, so that they can build a life in Dumfries and Galloway. And I think the other bit to that is attracting new jobs to the area, so that people have a chance to stay and live and work here.
And we're going to actually come back to jobs as a question in the wider economy in a wee bit. So we'll take that as an invitation into that subject, but we'll bring it up a bit more later. James, I'm going to bring you in. What's the Green Party's plans around education, in particular the attainment gap challenge, which I guess we've just heard, including from the SNP, isn't where I think as a country we want that to be. It's still a challenge we're not fully cracking. So what's your take on this?
Obviously, there's been quite a lot that's been said just now, ranging from that attainment gap all the way down to rurality of not just Dumfriesshire, but the surrounding area. Regarding that attainment gap, though, it really comes down to us not understanding it purely as an educational issue. A lot of this comes down ultimately, as both Joan and Colin have said, down to poverty, that structural poverty that exists not just in rural areas, but also in urban areas. It is stubborn, and it basically requires us to take into consideration other things such as the mental health capabilities that the Scottish Government already has. So although we do have limited powers, there are other things that we can focus on right now. So such as improving mental health provision, treating it, obviously getting the culture to change, to get people to treat mental health as seriously as physical health, supporting parents and carers who are sending their kids to school, having access to meaningful work. And also, down the line, we need to start thinking about, when we want to employ people as well, making sure that everyone has access to a decent amount of money. So, the Scottish Greens consistently support things such as universal basic income as one of those keys towards unlocking aspects of this. Now, the pandemic has illustrated how a lot of these challenges have existed for a much longer time, and that attainment gap obviously is existing within that quite fragile situation. Now, the Greens, for example, also want to consider alternative ways, bit radical ways of doing things, but not as radical when you think about how other countries do things. So we're saying, maybe also our education system needs to change a little bit. Maybe start kids at the age of 7. Make sure those first couple of few years are actually play-based, based on social skills, before we head straight into assessing people and giving people exams. Going more down to the general kind of educational themes, the rurality is very important. In places like Dumfries, for example, there are further education colleges. We have outposts from the University of Glasgow and the University of West of Scotland, but these offer relatively limited courses. And, we want basically people to think more about how we can improve and create a local hub around that. And it's a shame because the campuses that we have are quite big around there. And it could basically make the place for a fantastic new further education institution or even a new university. So there's questions now of also putting funding parity at the same level between further education institutions and universities, making sure, for example, that we can employ new doctors, nurses, midwives, things that this region needs. So that's the kind of general attitude the Greens are going into this next election with, and it comes down to basically pushing the government into that direction where they understand the general structural nature of so much of what we're talking about today.
James, thank you very much. I'm sure lots of young people are hearing there that the Greens are offering 2 more years of non-formal schooling in some form at the early years there, so it'll be interesting to see what young people think of that as a proposal. We're going to bring in now Richard and the Liberal Democrats, the Lib Dems take on education, and particularly again the attainment gap challenge.
Yeah, thanks, John. Obviously, having taught at an academy for over 30 years, it's no surprise that education is very close to my heart, especially the education of vulnerable children and those who find it more difficult to learn. Well, after 10 years of a council tax freeze in Scotland and Westminster cutbacks, it's no surprising that the attainment gap has not been narrowed, because children are not getting proper support in the classroom which they deserve. On the poverty front, like other parties, we support the increase in the child allowance and also extending free school meals. But all young people have had a difficult time over the last year with the pandemic, getting to grips with home learning, distance learning, and the fiasco of the SQA algorithm, which they all suffered from last year, and the sort of tensions around the exam results, and the children still there have to be allowed to catch up and given the support. I think a big idea that we've got, the SQAs needs reform and reform badly, and for that organisation to reflect teachers' ideas and needs and the children's needs as well. Also, there's a scandal in the Scottish education system which goes back to the Scottish Government, because there are 1,800 teachers on temporary contracts in Scotland. they don't have any, they cannot get mortgages because they don't have securities. So these teachers should be immediately put on permanent contracts. They should be put into employment in our schools, reduce the class size and support the kids. Liberal Democrats also want new support assistants in the classroom, because they have been cut badly, not only in Dumfries and Galloway, but throughout Scotland. So that is a priority for the Liberal Democrats. We share the ideas. The Greens are introducing a Scandinavian system where children don't go into formal education until the age of 7, because when children first start at primary school, for example, they can be either 5 years old or less than 4 years old. And there's a big development gap there, which disadvantages the younger children. So
you support a similar model there to the Green Party, Richard?
I don't know if it's in the Green Manifesto, but certainly in the Liberal Democrat Manifesto.
That's coming.
Also, the present system disadvantages males, boys in primary school. They don't achieve or attain as much as girls in primary school, and one of the reasons is because boys develop a little bit slower than females. So I think that's a shared policy which we could push forward with the Greens in the Scottish Parliament.
Thank you very much, Richard. Joan, did you want to come in on that point, on a point there? Sorry.
Yeah, I will come in if you want. Is that allowed?
I thought you were jumping to come in.
Well, it was really just in the early years, and when young people start school, and in other countries they've got different models of starting late, and that's interesting. Those countries have very high quality early years education, which we are trying to roll out in Scotland. And by next term, we're going to have 1,400 hours of early years education rolled out in Scotland, which will make a big difference. But I think it's important to understand that, you know, without really good quality early years education, young people, children, fall behind even before they start school. That's the education gap, the poverty-related attainment gap, is established when children start school. Which is one of the reasons we are trying to improve early years education. Indeed, we have increased the number of hours significantly since we came to power.
And thank you then for that. It's just been such a big issue, and it remains stubborn and it remains challenging. I know particularly for young people who have struggled so much, often judged wrongly, is somehow part of the problem with this pandemic. I mean, dealing so much with an education system that should be wrapped around and supporting them, and again seeing that equal playing fields remain very difficult. I want to actually come back into another question then that actually I think Colin in the first answer started to introduce the idea around, and that's that idea, that wider element around challenging poverty in the biggest sense. I'm going to put it out there that, you know, most parties or a number of you support, for example, doubling child payments, but that alone is not going to make any structural difference to the levels of child poverty and poverty more widely. What's the big move around trying to tackle poverty, particularly in the light of a huge number of families and communities relying on food banks, communities, charity, third sector organisations? Young people are saying to us that's not acceptable and not fair. What's each party's big move around trying to redress that kind of underlying issues around that structural poverty? And if I can start with Oliver on this question, that would be great.
Thanks, John. I still go back to something Gordon Brown once said, and that is for me that work, you know, good quality, meaningful work is the best route out of poverty. And I think that's one of the challenges in our region. Of course, we need a safety net that's there for those who can't work for various reasons. But I think that's one of the challenges in Dumfries and Galloway is that we're a relatively low-wage economy, one of the lowest in the UK, and we need to attract high-skilled quality jobs and increase the kind of working age population here. If we're going to tackle poverty, and I think that's I think that's the answer. I've welcomed, which yes, the SNP and government delivered, but was a Conservative manifesto pledge, which was creating a new South of Scotland enterprise agency, and I think it's got a key role to play moving forward, because again, we've had a Scotland-wide enterprise agency that didn't take a lot of interest in our region and let opportunities pass it by, and I think already in its first year, the new South of Scotland Enterprise Agency has done more to create jobs and back community projects than we saw from Scottish Enterprise in the 4 years before that, in my time as an MSP. So for me, that's the big answer, and it's about making sure the right support's in place at the moment as well.
So how do we do it? Just to push in a wee bit, because if we know there's an attainment gap, we know that the current provision, services, school, education, job programmes, we know that young people in poverty and from tough backgrounds aren't getting the fair crack to access that and thrive in it. These initiatives are great, but what are we doing around those young people that are already struggling to access services like that enterprise agency? What do we do to make sure they're able to just thrive, not just fight to survive in their families, even from a financial point of view? One example we're hearing touted a lot is, for example, a universal basic income. What's kind of your party's big idea around trying to tackle that structural economic poverty?
Yeah, so I don't, my party doesn't support a universal basic income. We don't think that model works, and we don't think it would work well in the UK. Some of the things that we have done, which we worked very closely with Richard's party on, and he'll probably want to distance himself from that. Now I've said it, but was increasing the personal allowance, which means that people on the first section of money they earn don't pay any tax. I think that's helped out a lot of people at the kind of lower end of the pay scale, and I do think, yes, there's been lots of issues round about it, but I think the kind of fundamentals behind universal credit that supports people who are working and looks at what they're earning and what they need to live on is the right idea, and I do think we need to look at it further again off the back of the pandemic, but I just think universal basic income doesn't target and support those who need it the most, and I don't think it would be an effective way of doing things.
Okay, thank you for that, Oliver. Richard, I will bring you in. Are you looking to distance yourself from that statement, and what's your take on the initial question?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to distance myself from that, because I think that was the one Liberal Democrat success in the coalition, is to get the threshold raised significantly before people pay tax, and that did help people in lower incomes. But I would disagree with the Conservatives on the universal income, because we share the sort of Green Party's enthusiasm for that, where we've got a national living wage which people can't live on. Obviously, people are not getting paid enough to live fulfilling lives where they don't have to worry about whether they have food on the table or fuel in their fires. So councils and the government is spending millions of pounds on anti-poverty measures. We're spending money on free school meals. So the universal income would provide the money at source where people don't have to feel like they're begging for handouts. Has worked in other countries like the Netherlands. It's a Liberal Democrat policy, but obviously it needs. At the moment, the Scottish government can't introduce that, so they'll have to work with the UK government, and so that we can get the powers to actually bring in the universal income. But it is a really important policy we need to introduce in the next couple of years.
Richard, thank you very much. Just around Colin then, it was referenced there that does sit as part of the benefit system, which is a reserve matter in Westminster, so not a direct issue, if you like, as a competence of the Scottish Parliament. Is the, I suppose, the main UK-wide party that's perhaps more favourable to universal basic income? I don't know. What's your take on that, and is that something you support, and what's your other main messages this election around anti-poverty policies?
We do support a minimum income. That absolutely is the case. I mean, there are 200,000 children 230,000 children living in poverty in Scotland at the moment, and that number's rising. I mean, Oliver Mundell quoted Gordon Brown earlier, and he was right to quote Gordon Brown because as Chancellor, he lifted 1 million children out of poverty under the last Labour government. Now, sadly, that good work is being reversed by both the SNP government in Edinburgh and the Conservative government at UK level, and child poverty is actually on the rise again at this moment in time. So it does need a range of initiatives, and we talked earlier about doubling the child support payment, because Scottish Parliament does have powers to bring in additional benefits if they want to do so. Those powers are now sitting with the Scottish Parliament, and it is about using the levers that we already have. Another example is schemes such as in Lanarkshire, you have a Club 365 where children effectively are provided with free school meals, not just during school time, but actually all year round as well. And we have to make sure that those types of initiatives are rolled out right across the whole of the country. It does come back also to one of the biggest ways out of poverty, there's no question about it, is making sure that we have those high-paid, high-skilled jobs in Dumfries and Galloway. It is a scandal that Dumfries and Galloway is actually the lowest paid region anywhere in Scotland. We have the lowest levels of pay in any other part of the country at the moment. So if we want to lift more people out of poverty, what we need to do is to do more to create those high-skilled, high-paid jobs that mean that young people, first of all, choose to stay in Dumfries and Galloway, because every year many actually leave the region because the job opportunities are not there. But when somebody is in a job, then they should be properly and well paid for that. And just one example of how we'll do that in this region, where the social care sector is growing all the time, is we would have an immediate increase in pay for social care staff to £12 an hour as a first step towards £15 an hour. That's something we proposed in the recent budget in the Scottish Parliament. Unfortunately, it wasn't supported by others, but that's something we would absolutely press for, because the best way to lift somebody out of poverty is to make sure they're being paid a fair wage.
Thank you. That's one to yourself. It was put to you that your party's been in government for a long time and has been partly responsible for what was put to Colin a reversal of the good work done by Gordon Brown on child poverty. What's your response to that in your wider party's offering around overcoming the unacceptable poverty statistics we have in this area, but across the country?
Could I just put that in context, John, in terms of, I accept that Gordon Brown did do good work in tackling child poverty, but as soon as the Conservatives, that was through tax credits, and as soon as the Conservatives got in the middle of a huge financial crisis that hit us in 2008, one of the first things they did was hit benefits, hit tax credits, and previous Labour Party in Westminster, as I recall, actually supported some of the measures that they brought in. So we in Scotland don't have powers over things like tax credits, as I said, over the setting of wage levels. So we have to work with the limited powers we have over working age benefits to try to address child poverty. But we don't control tax credits and things like that. And I hesitate to disagree with the chair, John, but I do disagree when you kind of dismiss the £20 child payment, because I think for families on low incomes, that will be transformational to get £20 a week per child. I think that'll make a big difference. And so I think that's why Colin's party support that too. But as I said, the SNP will deliver that. And in addition to that, some of the other measures that we're rolling out with the powers that we have, like we've already rolled out free school meals for primaries 1 to 3. In the next Parliament, we'll roll that out to all primary school children, both lunches and breakfasts. That will save people a lot of money, as well as giving children a nutritious meal. And some of the other policies that we're already delivering, like the free prescription charges, the tax on health, saves families money. Council tax freeze saves families money. We will be ensuring that every family gets a digital device for their child. That again will save money. I already mentioned in my introductory remarks the educational maintenance allowance. I think we probably don't talk about that enough, actually. We talk, and we're very proud of the fact that we've got free tuition in Scotland. But I think the fact that we kept the educational maintenance allowance for 16 to 19-year-olds in school and college and expanded it to all average and low-income families is really, really helpful to those families. The nursery education, as well as being good for children's development, also saves families considerable amounts of money. And in the next Parliament, we're going to be looking at wraparound childcare as well. But at the end of the day, we would like to do more. That's what we are doing. We would like the powers to do more. You talked, Joan, and I do agree with you on this, is structural inequality. And that's why when we come out of the pandemic, I would like to see us have a choice about Scotland's future so that we can tackle that structural inequality that happens at UK level. Because if you look at other small countries around Europe, the Netherlands, Norway, Switzerland, Denmark, they are much more equal societies than us. They have more opportunities for young people. They don't have the same structural inequalities as the UK. And I would like young people in Scotland to have the opportunity to vote in a referendum in Scotland's future so that we can start building the kind of country that's comparable to those countries and that it's more equal and provides more opportunities for our young people and tackles poverty.
Joan, thank you. Oliver, I'm going to come to you. I think you wanted to just jump in on, it seemed you were inspired by something Joan said, and then I'm going to come to James for his substantive contribution to this question. But if you can, very short, Oliver.
Just as a quick question for Joan, really. I don't understand on school meals, when there was other parties in the Parliament who wanted to bring them in this session, why the SNP are waiting till the next session, and the same on free devices, for kids at school level. Scottish Borders Council managed to do that at the start of the pandemic. After 14 years, why should we think that these things are only a priority now?
Well, I don't remember the Scottish Conservatives calling for free devices before the pandemic. I mean, certainly the
Scottish Conservative Council did it. When the Conservatives were in power, we delivered devices to every young person in the Scottish Borders.
Well, that's fantastic for that council. I know that we also delivered devices at a local level, because I remember going to see Dumfries and Galloway College, actually, and that was one of the things that was just when the first lockdown lifted, and they talked about access to laptops, for example, and that was one of the things that the Scottish Government did roll out. But yeah, I think we're doing lots. And we are restricted in the amount of money that we can raise. We have put in place a more progressive income tax system in terms of our powers over income tax, so that people who are better off pay more. And the Scottish Conservatives opposed that. They opposed that more progressive income tax system. So we'll continue to roll out progressive policies. You can't do it all at once, and we are hidebound with some of the fact that a lot of our money would depend on the UK. They still hold the purse strings. We don't control all the taxes raised in Scotland. We can't borrow in the international markets like the UK government can. And that's why we're arguing for more powers for the Parliament and the democratic right to choose for the Parliament to have full powers so that we can tackle some of these things.
James, I want to bring you in on the question there around some of the Green Party positions. Could you start to move us as well into a bit of a theme around what you do as part of this measure? Jobs has come out a lot here, to start to introduce more jobs for local young people in the area.
Sure, I will feed into that. I think it's quite strange though, because I know that the powers are limited at Holyrood. I know all this, and it's very, very clear to me as well, because I obviously, as a pro-independence guy, it is kind of weird that the same week that we're talking about this, we hear plans about spending £200 million on a new royal yacht or something like that, because that's money that we can basically spend on things like that, whilst we chastise basically Scottish institutions for not being able to get people out of poverty. Now, poverty is a major issue, and I don't think any one party is going to have all the solutions necessary. It really depends on that cross consensus in Parliament, and it depends on that just transition. So when you're talking about jobs, we need to now just think about things like UBI. Of course, that's in the background, but there is a green recovery that needs to happen. We need to basically think about, especially in the south of Scotland, Dumfriesshire, but also in East Lothian, things like fuel poverty are really major contributors to basically a lot of the economic issues that a lot of low-income families face, and that can actually be the cause for more investment and further jobs. We want to invest money so that that we can basically install 500,000 heat pumps in houses by 2030. And that's something that generates jobs. We also want, for example, to do other things such as giving access to public transport, free for people, for younger people, make sure that we invest in rail and buses otherwise. And we also want to focus on other things such as building new homes, making sure that 70% of those homes are available for social rent and are not just sold off as equity. But yeah, I mean, there is so much that could be said about the sort of jobs that we need in Scotland. We talk about Norway and Finland as comparable countries, about 5 million people that live within. And, even a country like Finland doesn't have access to the same natural resources that Scotland has. Scotland has Europe's largest renewable energy potential. And so much of that control is still Westminster, because after all, a lot of those powers relate to the fact that we still have an illegal nuclear weapons base just outside Glasgow. There's so much of that all intertwines with one another. So the question is, do we invest money in creating those jobs and focus on that green recovery? Or do we continue, for example, with a bit of a status quo approach, where we continue also still drilling and looking for oil and gas? There are jobs that are available, especially in the south. We can, for example, increase focus on community-owned wind farms and things like these. These are things that we can do, but until now, we just haven't really had it at the agenda. But I said, with the next 5 to 9 years, this needs to now be on the agenda, and especially with job creation and getting people in meaningful work that's going to be long-term. That's one way of doing it.
So I want to stay on that. Thanks, James. You talk about the green recovery and renewables is a key target for providing local jobs for young people. Richard, can I bring yourself in, and can we just speak tangibly? What are you going to do to ensure the real creation of real jobs for young people locally?
Well, the Liberal Democrats want to create thousands of jobs across Scotland in green energy. And I think there are lots of local opportunities to do that, because we're talking about Dumfriesshire and Dumfries and Galloway. So, for example, we want to put all our energies behind the Chapel Cross Energy Park. There's good ideas there to produce hydrogen, which could replace fossil fuels and create lots of high-value jobs there. And in the energy park, it's one of the biggest it's going to be one of the biggest production sites in Scotland, the size of it, obviously in the nuclear industry. Also, in Dumfries, I don't know if you know, is built on a hot water aquifer under the geology of the town, deep underground. There is a huge reservoir of hot water which could be tapped in to produce a district heating system for Dumfries. I've always been an advocate for using the tidal power of the Solway. There's 4 chances of getting energy during the day, and I would like to see an electric bridge built between Annan and Cumbria to produce massive amount of electricity to heat homes on both sides of the border. So I think if I was in Holyrood, I'd be campaigning to have these green jobs here, because as has been said, we're a low income economy, and we really need a boost from the Scottish government, because at times it seems that we're a forgotten part of Scotland.
Just to be really quick, are any of those big infrastructure projects in your manifesto, Richard? As it's
in my local manifesto.
It's passionate about as a candidate.
It's covered by our policy of including all these sorts of energy, hydrogen production, tidal use of tidal. There's also more offshore wind.
So you see, it's covered under your green infrastructure plan within that. Okay, thank you very much. Oliver, can I come to yourself around? I don't know where you're sitting around. Any tangible elements you want to talk to around job creation for young people locally?
Yeah, well, like Richard, I've been a big backer of the Green Energy Park at Chapel Cross, and supported a number of the companies that are looking to advance there. It's already received money from our commitment of funds from both the Scottish and UK government through the Borderlands growth deal, which was something that was previously in my party's manifesto. So I think it's something to build on, and I think it's a big opportunity for the area. I also think by starting work on upgrading the A75, we can create a lot of jobs quickly associated with that. Again, I think it's, in this region, I do think it's more about the local, and I think that's one of the lessons that we have all seen, and I think there'd be broad agreement on that, with the new enterprise agency, because rather than trying to drop projects in that might work in the urban central belt, we've been able to develop projects from the ground up, that are community led, that are viable here, But I think the big challenge, moving forward, I think is to try and create more jobs off the back of things like agriculture and forestry, which are big in our region. But not all of the economic benefit associated with them is enjoyed here, and we need to add value to those products and make sure we've got a skilled workforce that can fill jobs that exist and take the benefit of those industries.
Thank you, Oliver. I'll bring in Joan and then Colin at this stage. So Joan, around job creation locally. Oh, sorry, you're on mute, Joan. You and that button's not getting on tonight, is it?
the mute button's not working for some reason. I have to go through this strange backwards method to unmute myself. I'm very proud of the fact that the Scottish Government, the SNP Scottish Government, has delivered the South of Scotland Enterprise Agency. I know that other parties backed it, but we did deliver it. And it's already delivering for Dumfries and Galloway, despite the fact that it actually launched during the pandemic, which is a real testament to the staff there. So, I mean, one of the things that they've done recently is put a large investment into a company called Alpha Solway, which is making PPE for the NHS, and it got a large NHS Scotland contract, and South of Scotland Enterprise have put, I think it's 4.8 million into that company to allow it to expand. It's an Annan company to allow it to expand the Dumfries operation and create 300 jobs on top of the extra jobs they've already created. So that's just one example. There are other examples like the South of Scotland Destination Agency, which is like a new tourism marketing agency for the South of Scotland, which is again a multi-million-pound investment from South of Scotland Enterprise. And of course they're investing in communities all across Dumfries and Galloway, in a similar way to the Highlands and Islands Enterprise Company has been doing for a number of years. So it's not just big, high growth companies, it's smaller local businesses that get investment. In terms of our plans going forward, we've got I think I mentioned, we've got £500 million planned investment in jobs and training, and £100 million in green jobs, and some of those green jobs will come about as a result of decarbonising the way we heat our homes. So that would be insulating them properly and changing to the kind of technologies that James talked about actually. Dumfries and Galloway College is a leader in these technologies, and I've visited quite a few times. I visited recently with the Scottish Power to open a new renewables hub there, which is doing some really fantastic things. And that's like training small businesses as well, training your plumbers and your small businesses to make sure that they know how to install these technologies. And so, because they're the ones that will encourage customers to take them up, but we'll also have significant incentive to encourage customers to take them up. And of course, that will create a lot of jobs. I mentioned we're going to increase the number of bus connections with a £500 million bus fund, but that will also be to decarbonise the bus network. And so all these green initiatives create jobs. What I would say is, like, in terms of the energy market is regulated at UK level. So the kind of subsidies that you give to energy come at UK level. And that's why, for example, the UK government has a huge subsidy for the company that's building the nuclear power station down south. I think it's in Somerset. Just a massive, massive subsidy for that nuclear power station. If that subsidy had gone into renewable power, that would be transformative. But in fact, the government actually cut the subsidy for renewable power. I mean, I would like to see that go into hydro and tidal power, because we need to subsidise these new technologies to give them a start in the market. But what we're doing in Scotland is we're using, education, skills development, that kind of thing to encourage development. But if we could regulate energy, we could create many more of these green jobs in the future.
Thank you very much, Joan. Colin, I want to bring you in just on the jobs element, and I'll come over to James with a new question, actually. You spoke about your 5 strands at the beginning, and top of that, you spoke about jobs. So can you localise that a wee bit? Is there any specific initiatives, green or otherwise, that your party is putting forward around local jobs for local young people?
I mean, I think it is absolutely a local issue, John. There's no question about it. I think the biggest challenge we face in this region is the fact that far too many of our young people do leave Dumfries and Galloway because we don't have those high-paid, high-skilled jobs that they need to at least have that choice to stay here if they want to do so. I think it's also important to highlight the fact that young people are more likely to be exploited through low pay and insecure work, and that's a particular challenge here in Dumfries and Galloway as well. Now, it's not a new problem caused by the pandemic, but it has got worse, and youth unemployment in Dumfries and Galloway is currently at its highest level for somewhere in the region of 8 years. So you mentioned the fact I had talked about the National Recovery Plan, and absolutely central to that is the jobs recovery element of that, and that includes a guaranteed job for every young person under the age of 25, either directly in the public sector, such as NHS or councils, or within the private and third sector, with the government funding the wages for those jobs over the next 6 months in return for the company committing to that job being permanent at the end of that 6 months. And I think a crucial part of that is those jobs also need to be focused on providing skills as well for those young people. So within the jobs, there'll be a training guarantee where 28% of the time is dedicated to developing skills and training. But I'll come back to that other point again. It's about the quality of those jobs as well. So we're proposing a good work plan which will improve the experience for young people when they are in work. So, for example, there's lots of funding provided by government to various companies at the moment, but there's not enough conditionality on that. And the types of conditionality that we would like to see is that, first of all, we shouldn't be supporting companies that continue to have 0-hour contracts, and we shouldn't be providing substantial sums of money to companies that continue to pay below the living wage if we're going to tackle the unfairness within the workplace. So that's an important strand as well, to tackle the lack of jobs within Dumfries and Galloway, and also to make sure that those jobs are properly paid. And there is a need, to use the challenges of climate change to make sure they're also green jobs. I mean, I think that, I'm sure we'll come back to the environment, and I'll use up more than my 2 minutes here if I start talking too much about that, but you'll get bigger buy-in from the public when it comes to tackling the climate challenge we face if we can show that there are benefits there when it comes to jobs. And at the moment, we don't have that in a lot of places. So a lot of complaints I get as an MSP is the fact we've got wind farms being built all over Dumfries and Galloway at the moment, and none of the jobs building those wind farms are actually in Scotland because they're all being built in other countries. So we need to look at challenges that we face to create those green jobs and actually make sure that we're tackling climate change by creating jobs as well. And one example is making sure that we fit all houses in Dumfries and Galloway with proper energy efficiency. That would create jobs locally, and it would tackle the scandal that 25% of people in Dumfries and Galloway are currently living within fuel poverty.
Colin, thank you. Listening, there's a really strong correlation between something that we all know young people are at the vanguard of, is it's the green revolution, as some people call it, the climate movement to hold kind of powers to be, if you like, it, protecting our planet much more. And that connection with the economy and the jobs element locally is something that I heard from every party there. I want to attempt to go to a couple of yes or no questions. Let's see how we get on with it. And then we'll just stop doing it if it doesn't work and use can you do yes or no, and you have to qualify it and all that. That happens with political things, and that's fine. We had a question come in you might have seen on the chat, so you can read ahead of me if you want. But very recently, for a lot of people in our industry, as the kind of youth rights sector, it was seen as a big victory to finally have the Scottish Parliament, I think with cross-party support, passed the UNCRC, Convention on the Rights of the Child. We have an anonymous young person put it to us, actually ask, as part of that, do you support the raising of the age of criminal responsibility in Scotland? Is putting the question there from the current 12 years old up to 16. There is brownie points for short answers to this, but I'm going to start with James and your party's position.
My understanding, and I have basically just opened my phone to double check that I don't make a faux pas. Yes, we do basically welcome the expected incorporation of that of that entire chart, which includes, for example, that very mentioned principle. So I would have said yes regardless, but I can confirm that if you go to our website on Tuesday, the 16th of March, we basically made it very clear in a press statement that that's the position that we take.
Thank you, James. Richard, is the Liberal Democrats' position on that question?
Yeah, we support the rights of the child, so we would support it.
Oliver?
No.
Joan?
Yeah. Like James, I'm also checking my phone. I was very pleased when we passed the UNCHRC. I note that it doesn't actually specify a minimal age of criminal responsibility, but the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child has recommended that it be no lower than 14. I know that there was a lively debate in the Scottish Parliament when we did raise the age of criminal responsibility. It was far too low in Scotland. I think it was one of the lowest in the world, so that absolutely had to be done. But I think probably going forward, I would want to hear different sides of the debates before I made up my mind, as long as we were compliant with UNCHRC, absolutely.
So I actually don't know this specifically myself. So the SNP don't have an expressed raising of the age of consent as yet. They want that.
Well, we've just raised it. We have just raised it.
And Colin?
We supported that change that was passed by the Scottish Parliament recently in raising that. But I think if we're serious about implementing the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, then we need to adhere to all of it. And I think we'll have a big debate in the next Parliament about whether we further raise that. The personal view is that yes, that should happen. But I think there'll be a big debate about that in the next Parliament.
Thank you very much, Colin, and I hope the person who asked that was happy with that. The next one that I've got is a local one, and it's does your party support the reopening of the Stranraer to Dumfries rail line, particularly given transport in this area is obviously really important for young people. I'll start with the last one first this time, Colin, and with yourself.
I personally do, yes, and we're committed to carrying out a feasibility study into that because it won't be cheap. I mean, it's a scandal that only the railway that's really been extended in recent years is the 35 miles and the Borders rail line. So we do need to look at reopening Dumfries to Stranraer. Absolutely, I'm personally passionate about that particular issue. The starting point is that feasibility study.
Fine, thank you. So that was a personal yes, and feasibility study is your way towards that from there. Joan?
Yes, personally, I would support it. I think it would be fantastic. It was obviously closed during the 60s when foolishly many railway lines were closed, but of course it would be a massive infrastructural investment. These big capital projects are part of ongoing feasibility studies, and there's already one being done actually in southwest Scotland, and the Stranraer to Gretna rail line or Carlisle rail line was one of the things that they said we should take forward and do more studies on. So yeah, it would be a huge, massive investment for this area. But I think a lot of work would need to be done to ensure that it was the right, because there are a number of choices obviously open to us to make sure it was the right choice. But in principle, I support it. Yeah. Great,
thank you very much, Oliver, for the Stranraer to Dumfries line.
Really the same answer as the others. Yes, support the principle, but I'd like to see the detailed feasibility work because I think we have other real priorities as well, like getting some of our stations reopened on existing lines, and I think it's and improving the A75. So it's a balance, but I think subject to feasibility, yes, I'd be very keen. And as a party, we're backing railways with big investment in our manifesto.
Thank you very much, James.
In principle, yeah, we have a rail for all scheme, and I know that basically it's going to be done in stages. In theory, yes, going all the way down to Stranraer, fantastic. But the first step is to electrify the line all the way from Dumfries to Thornhill, and then, for example, to continue potentially down to East Riggs as well. So these things will happen in stages. Until then, the first thing we can do, for example, as we've started to do right now, is also promote free bus travel for people under the age of 22 and try to reduce costs as well before we have that infrastructure in place. We need to stop massive car use as soon as we can, because that's one of the leading contributors to our domestic use of energy.
You weaved in another transport policy to a yes or no there. And Richard?
Yeah, politics is that of the possible. It may not be feasible. I think we shouldn't look at it till we've opened the stations at Thornhill, East Riggs, Beatwick and Langham. So I think it's way down the line.
Well, okay, thank you very much. I don't know if that pun was intended, but I enjoyed that. And the next question,
Light at the end of the tunnel, maybe.
Very, very important to see this one. And on that note about kind of finding light at the end of the tunnel, one of the things that young people right across the country now are talking a lot about is the impact, particularly on young people's mental health. A number of you spoke about mental health specifically at the beginning, and there's a question coming from a number of young people actually. Do you think the mental health support available to young people in the area at the moment is sufficient? And what do you do to help? If not, what would you be doing to help improve that? And I'll start with James on this one, please.
I mean, I have first-hand experience of using the health service. Obviously not down in Dumfriesshire. I've been using it in NHS Lothian. I'm somebody who lives with a lifelong mental health condition. And so I know, for example, the system is not perfect and there has to be so much more investment into this. Accessibility is one of those major issues that I think for many people is so important. Having GPs, for example, that are given more training to deal with individuals who come to them with issues, especially young people, especially coming out of this entire process. And again, it's very easy to think about or just throw money at the issue, but it's also a matter of changing ways of how we think about treating it. It's getting people to also examine mental health as much as we do physical health. All these things come together and trying to understand that most of us in our lifetime will experience a mental health problem, but the people who, for example, who need that help as soon as possible, young people who are particularly vulnerable to a lot of the social stresses that we're all going under, so much more can be done. So in a very brief statement, I can only say all my support goes in that direction.
James, thank you very much for sharing that. Richard, can we bring yourself in?
Yeah, the last year has been particularly stressful for young people, not being able to have any social contact, stressing about exams and how they progress. The support for mental health support was very poor before the pandemic, and it's not got much better. You'll have heard Willie Rennie week after week going on about it in the Scottish Parliament and demanding more support for people who are facing issues like this. And I think as part of the negotiations for the Scottish budget, you managed to secure, Joan will keep it right, £150 million towards improving services. We want to do more in the next Parliament. We want to make sure that every workplace, every large workplace and every school, primary and secondary school, that there'll be trained counsellors there to recognise people's needs for children and young people to go and seek advice and help. And it's quite disgraceful at the moment. It takes at least 15 weeks to get an appointment with the mental health services with CAMHS, and I think that issue has got to be addressed going forward. So more investment in the future, more training so that young people and everybody really gets access to mental health and it's treated equally as physical health.
Thank you, Richard. And we'll bring in Oliver. I think, was it yourself, Oliver, that actually spoke specifically about, was it 10% of the health budget around mental health? Sorry if I picked that up wrong. But
No, that's correct. I mean, it's one of the things that surprises me that it's not 10% already when you think the number of people that interact with mental health services. And that's the formal NHS ones before we even look at what the third sector do to pick up the slack. So that commitment equates to about £325 million extra, because I do think more resource is needed. One of the things I've been proudest of in the Parliament is co-chairing the cross-party group on mental health. And the thing we find time and time again is that services are very patchy, particularly in rural and remote parts of the country. And without increased resource, it's not possible to deliver a quality service everywhere. And I think we have to accept moving forward that it's more expensive to deliver mental health services in rural areas, because the reality is professionals who are supporting people, people like community psychiatric nurses, are going to have to travel further between people. And again, if you want people to get support quickly and close to them, there's time and money involved in doing that. So for me, that's there's no getting away from that. We don't put enough money into mental health services, and that's why they're so under pressure.
Oliver, thank you very much. I'll bring in Colin and then Joan, if that's okay. Colin, are you happy with the provision for young people looking at mental health? And if not, what would your party be proposing to solve that?
I mean, there's no doubt that COVID's created a huge health crisis, not just the physical impact of the virus, but clearly the mental health impact. At the moment, we've got, I think, around 10,000 young people across Scotland that are waiting to start treatment at CAMHS, and that number is going to rise in the coming weeks. I think one of the big challenges to making sure that we have a more of a focus on preventative measures. You know, if we spot problems at an earlier stage and provide early help, that's going to go a long way to preventing someone's mental health condition deteriorating further. And I think, to be fair, in Dumfries and Galloway, we've been leading the way when it comes to support by making sure that all our Dumfries and Galloway appointed youth information workers have that training in order to provide mental health support in our secondary school. So that's something that's already been delivered here in Dumfries and Galloway, and I think we're really leading the way when it comes to that. But we do need to see the investment and support in that extended a lot further. And one of the measures that Labour are proposing is that every single young person could be offered a mental health assessment in school to identify any problems they have at an early stage, so they can get that early support. There's no doubt will help prevent some of the challenges that we face. And I think funding is absolutely the key to it. I mean, Oliver, I'm not going to get in a bidding war with Oliver, but our manifesto commits to 11% of the NHS budget being allocated to mental health. And that actually brings it in line with England and Wales, because that's the level, percentage level that takes place in their area. So that's what our commitment is, certainly on a manifesto. It needs that investment, but I think crucially it needs that focus on preventative measures, including some of the good work that we're seeing here in Dumfries and Galloway at the moment.
Colin, thank you very much. And on the mental health subject, I'll bring in Joan.
Thank you very much. No, I agree that more needs to be done, absolutely. I mean, you see, from your own family, the impact that the pandemic has on young people in school, and also young people, I think, in their 20s as well. I've got a 22 girl who was 22 at the start of the outbreak of the pandemic. You know, like, it's an age where you're forming relationships, where you're establishing your career. My daughter was an actor musician, and her whole career that she had trained for was wiped out overnight, and everything that gave her pleasure and it was good for her well-being was wiped out overnight. So I see the pressure on young people, and it's going to take a long time, and we need to make a major investment to ensure that people can recover from this. We are committed to investing in child and adolescent mental health. Mental health generally, we're going to ensure that the direct investment in mental health services increases by 25%, so that by the end of the Parliament, 10% of the frontline budget is invested in mental health. We're actually increasing the frontline budget. I know there's a lot of percentages here, but we're increasing the frontline NHS budget by 20%, which is very, very significant indeed. And 1% of that frontline budget is going specifically into child and adolescent mental health services. So we hope that will make a big difference. But I agree with the other speakers who have said that that we need to tackle the root cause of it, so that, like, before things get to a crisis point, that people's well-being is addressed. And actually, we were doing that in terms of our approach to young people's mental health. We were focusing on making sure that schools had experts in that could deal with any mental health problems before they arose. That was being put into place before the pandemic, but obviously the pandemic has blown all that kind of thing away. So we need to get back to that. We need to tackle it before it becomes a crisis, but we certainly need significant investment in CAMHS, because too many people are waiting too long.
Thank you, Joan. Can I just say, any young people watching this, if you do feel like you're affected by any of these issues, please reach out and speak to someone. If you're involved in this conversation, you're probably engaged in the youth work service or youth services or youth council of some sort. And I think there's cross-party support from all parties and different degrees of recognition and solutions around recognising that it can be a really tough time, and you know, the starting point is reaching out to have a conversation, even though it's really difficult. So thank you to all candidates answering there. I'm going to close up with hopefully a final but very important yes or no question if possible, and that's, even with mental health, is that idea around preventative measures, stopping it getting to that point, a lot of you spoke about schools, but at the heart of that is, I suppose, the kind of work that D&G Youth Council is involved in, and that is youth participation and youth work. It has been a challenge around funding, around recognition, around parity of esteem with other statutory services. Do you support the incorporation of youth work provision as a statutory provision in Scotland? And if I can start with, if we can do yes or no's as much as we can, that'd be great. And I'll start with Oliver in this one, if I can.
I'm certainly open to that and see money ring fenced for youth work services, because I think that's the problem at the moment. Different councils take different approaches, and D&G are excellent at the top of the pack, but even they struggle to resource the services people are looking for. So yes, I'm open to
statutory youth work, but you can say yes now to ring fence youth service budgets locally. Thank you, Richard.
Yes, if it's statutory, then the council will have to deliver it.
Absolutely, James.
Simple yes.
Right. Yeah, it'd be great if it was. Joan?
Yes, I do support it. Although I would say that I think youth services in Dumfries and Galloway are pretty good. You know, like I think they're exemplary, actually, some of the youth work, and it's kind of ahead of other parts of Scotland. But yeah, I would support that. I'm not sure what our manifesto says. It's 76 pages, so I would actually have to look at it. But I personally would support it.
Great. So if it's not in there, we can quote Joan as an internal lobby to get the SNP to where we want them to be. And Colin?
I do very much support it. There's no guarantee, of course, of everything getting funded, because other services like education are statutory, but we've seen cuts, sadly, in there as well. And even at the moment, and I agree with Joan that we should recognise the good work that takes place in Dumfries and Galloway. I mean, the Labour Council there have delivered that single youth work service. It's delivered equal coverage across the region. We've got a dedicated young people's champion in the region. We've got the Youth Council up and running. And there's a huge amount of really good work that's nationally recognised. I remember in Parliament last year we had a debate on the Year of the Young Person, and there was a queue of Dumfries and Galloway MSPs wanting to speak in that debate to talk about the fantastic work taking place in our region. So it's nationally recognised, and it is something that I'm incredibly proud of.
Thank you very much. And it just says a young activist or young youth sector activist myself, and worked right across all 32 local authorities at Dumfries and Galloway is darn impressive to what they make happen, often on very limited budgets as well, albeit some of the better ones in the country. Can we, on behalf of all the young people present and watching in the future, say a massive thank you to all our candidates for that conversation. This, as I say, will be recorded and put up online. Subtitles will be added. Continue to engage with the candidates and others using hashtag YouthVoiceDG, and you can get in touch with the Youth Council as well, with the amazing MSYPs in the area, and can help champion that cause. I think one of the candidates said earlier, whoever you vote for, please just think about this, get engaged, raise your voice and vote, because it's too easy for young people's voices to be left off the political corridors of power, and it's by that step around getting involved in things like this that make that happen. So I'm going to wrap that up there, say a massive thank you, everyone, for joining us. Happy voting this week, and don't forget your umbrellas based on what's been happening across the country today. Thank you all, and have a good night. Thank you.